everyone. Welcome to the April 8th Allocation Committee of the Children's Levy. I'm Ted Wheeler. I'm the mayor of the city of Portland. I also serve as the chair of the Allocation Committee. And as per usual, I'd like to introduce my colleagues. On my left is Felicia Tripp-Folson, who's our county appointed member. Thank you for your service. And on my right is Julie Young, who is appointed by the city. And of course, to the far right is Mitch Harnaker, our business community representative. Thank you both for your continued service. Multnomah County Commissioner Jessica Vega-Peterson is unable to join us today. We have our full staff here today. The PCL staff, Lisa Pellegrino is here, and Meg McElroy is here, and Lisa Hansel, and John Coughlin is somewhere, and John Kelly. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the great work you do. Before we jump into the thick of things, can I get a motion, please, to approve the minutes of our March 18th meeting?
So moved.
And I think I need a second, don't I?
Second.
So I have a motion and I have a second. Is there any dissent? All in favor, vote aye.
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 Opposed? None. So that's done. Next, we have time for public comment. Now, there's several opportunities for public comment over the course of this meeting. The first section of public comment is for people who have comments on items not on our agenda, but I will be quick to add related to the Children's Levy. And we've set aside time later to 3 different times for public discussion. One during our conversation about the community engagement report that we're going to have the opportunity to hear from staff about today. We're also going to have an opportunity after our discussion of the small grants fund proposal, which will be before us today. And last but not least, after we discuss potential changes to public testimony and advocacy procedures for the upcoming funding round. So with that, we'll take any public testimony on issues not related to any of the things I just discussed that are actually on the agenda today. Any takers? This is so different than Wednesday mornings at Portland City Council. That's not a bad thing. All right, up first is a presentation then from Empress Rules, great name, on the Community Engagement Initiative that they embarked on with us last fall. Lisa Hansel's here to introduce Empress Rules, CEO, and I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, and I'm sorry. Is it Kiyoshi Owens?
There you go.
Did I get it right?
You got it.
Excellent. Extra credit for the mayor. And she's brought her team along to discuss the report findings and highlights. Good afternoon.
Great. Good afternoon. Before we move into the presentation, just want to provide a little bit of background for folks in the audience and at home who may not be as familiar with this effort as all of you. So every 5 years, the levy undertakes a community engagement process to inform funding priorities and strategies for the next levy period. In the past, staff has designed and implemented the community engagement processes. While we received lots of information from service providers and community group stakeholders, the involvement, the community engagement with community members was more limited. To address the diverse needs of Portland's children, youth, and their families, the levy recognizes the need to engage the broader diversity of the community, especially folks that we haven't heard from in the past. The levy felt the best way to do this was to partner with a consultant team that was embedded in the community with established relationships with diverse communities. Last summer, the levy issued an intermediate request for proposals, and Empress Rules with Kiyoshi Owens as the principal was chosen as the consultant to carry out this work. Kiyoshi and her team are here to present findings and highlights of what they heard from the community about needs, challenges, and community solutions. The committee received a copy of the executive summary in advance of this meeting, and copies are available here today for the audience. The full report and executive summary will be sent to the levy database just as soon as it's finished up, and both documents will be available on the levy website later this week. I welcome Kiyoshi and her team to introduce themselves and share with you what they heard.
Thanks for all being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having us. Oh, you want me to sit there? Okay. Please hold this off the chair. Okay. I love my team, y'all, so. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. I'm sorry?
Good afternoon.
Oh, is it? Oh, good afternoon. I'm just excited to be here, excited to be alive. I'm excited that everybody here is alive as well. And so, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be a part of this amazing experience. This is something that I'm sure I can speak on behalf of my team that we're not going to forget, and we really enjoyed spending time with the community and getting to hear their strengths as well as their challenges, and to be able to be a part of some of those solutions, to facilitate those solutions, or their voices, is really an honor. So thank you. Thank you to the Levy staff, who is very supportive of us. Great relationships, great people. So thank you for that. All right, so I guess do you want to, do we just get started or? Okay, great. So can everybody see the? Is it this right here? Okay. I heard it's a little bit challenging to see, so we apologize for that. So today's discussion, we're going to talk about who we are, why we're here, why we're really here, what we did, how we did it, when we did it, who participated, what the community said, what we learned, and then how do we continue the conversation. And then if you would like to have further interactions with myself or any members of our team, you can contact us via our website, which will be at the end. All right, so who are we? This is my wonderful friend, Afrida Davis, who is a racial equity coach. Danice Elijah, she could not be with us today. She experienced a tragedy, and so our hearts are with her in this moment. Wonderful mother and just community advocate. Emma Cisneros, a facilitator and translator. Myself, I'm the project manager and also facilitator. We have Nicole Sierra, who's an RMC researcher. We have Nakia Solbure, racial equity facilitator. And then my beloved sister, Samiko Taylor-Hill, who's our engagement specialist. Awesome. So why are we here? We're here to understand community perspectives about the most needed services for children and families. To present community solutions to improve outcomes for children and families, to cultivate community relationships, and to promote the understanding of the Portland Children's Levy and their services. Why are we really here? So in the report, I stated that the Children's Levy is a kind response to symptoms of white supremacy. And how that was created, I thought it would be out of integrity to start at the solutions without actually acknowledging some of the root causes of our real problems, such as the exclusion of African Americans that was written into the Constitution in 1857, how white male settlers were given 650 acres of land, even more if they were married, that was taken away from the indigenous population, how Chinese immigrants were excluded and driven out by mobs in Oregon City, Mount Tabor, and Albina. The Immigration Act that excluded immigrants over 16 who could not read in any language. Housing inequities and discrimination against African American, Latino renters, people of color in general. And then today, with the recent reports of the 53% racial achievement gap between white students and students of color. So I just kind of like a timeline of just a couple of things that got us to where we're at today, and why I believe the levy was created, which was a kind response to a symptom of white supremacy. So, what do? We had 500 questionnaires that just asked basic demographic information, get to know like who, what are people's experiences and how are they living. 405 community surveys that was composed of parents, caregivers, foster parents, and youth, and general community members as well. They all got to participate. 95 service providers participated with open-ended questions. And we had 8 focus groups, which composed of 2 Spanish-speaking groups, foster care impacted, disability impacted, foster care impacted, disability impacted, immigrants, provider, parent provider, and youth. We had 2 youth groups. Thank you. That's what teams are for. So how do we do it? The Levy and I, we all worked together, our team worked together to do an online social media campaign where we reached out to friends, family, community members, and diverse communities. And we reached out via email, text messages, direct Facebook messaging. We really wanted to connect with the people on a more personal level. We worked through community-based organizations, so we shared with them what we were doing, and they were wonderful and very supportive, and they helped share the message as well. We had wonderful community liaisons that we got to meet, which are people in the community who just do what they're supposed to do because it's the right thing to do. And so we were able to connect with them and then provide them a small stipend to help connect with communities, as well as provide translation services for the languages that we did not speak. And then we went to about 51 community-based events, which was wonderful. You guys want to say anything about that?
No, not really. Sorry. It was, to me, that was the best part of this project, is getting out and learning all of the different community partners that are out there. Because if it wasn't for this project, I would have known about certain organizations and the work that they do and the people that they reach.
Awesome. Thank you. So who participated?
So 67% were parent or caregivers, 17% were youth, and 14% were foster parents. 2.4% were over the age of 60, 5.4% did not disclose their age, 6.5% were between the ages of 18 and 20, 8.4% were between the ages of 50 and 59, 6% were 14 to 17, 24.5% were 40 to 49, and the largest part, 38.3%, were between the ages of 30 and 39. 43% had children between the ages of 0 and 5, and 60% had children between the ages of 6 and 18. 11% had a disability themselves, while 20% had children with a disability. So 24.4% had less than high school degree.
And we also had youth in there, so just keep that in mind, that youth are also a part of that group.
24% were impacted by foster care. 66% identified as female and 33% identified as male. 19% identified as LGBTQ plus community. 27% experienced houselessness. 32% identified as immigrant or a refugee. 49% have an income less than $50K. So 52% of the participants spoke English. 30% of the population was Latinx or Hispanic.
We also had, and during this part, we also allowed communities to identify their full identities. So they were allowed to check however they identified.
For the provider survey, the demographics were 88% were female, 81% spoke English as a primary language, 10% identified as an immigrant or refugee, and 39% between the ages of 30 and 39. 42% were white, 24% were Latinx, and 20% were African American. 78% said that they were somewhat to very familiar with the levy. 52% received funding from the levy, and 81% were community-based nonprofits.
want to talk about focus groups? Okay. So for focus groups, I already mentioned earlier, we had 2 youth groups, 2 Spanish-speaking immigrant refugee, parent provider, foster care impacted immigrant refugee. And so what did they say? You guys excited about that? Right now? You want to do it right now? Was that it? Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, we just wanted to give a little bit of detail about how we did the focus groups as well. We prioritized reducing barriers, and so that looked like not only providing food and accommodations for people who are participating, but we also offered compensation so that people who are maybe having to miss a day of work or miss some hours at work, they didn't have to lose out on the money side of it, so it was more financially viable. We also provided, like Kiyoshi mentioned, translation services to our capacity to be able to hear from members of our community whose languages we do not speak. And
Affinity.
and we also we did this on a weekend to try to offer something when not during dinner time, not during after the workday, right? For a lot of people, of course, schedules vary, but and we it was really important to us that we offered opportunity for people to gather in affinity that was not just according to racial affinity, but was across points of connection that were different, because we saw a lot of intersecting identities. So we tried to give people a chance for affinity as well as they were sharing their real insight about what they experienced. And I just wanted to also say, having been one of the facilitators of those focus groups, just the power and beauty of being able to circle up with members of the community who have so much insight from their lived experience firsthand every day. And I heard loud and clearly from them that one of the main things they were so thankful for was having a channel, a way to express that, some designated time for sharing what they know and they've already known, and I was blown away by the power of that coming together in that way, and hoping for an opportunity for us to do that more, because this insight exists and it's really just providing the space for it and allowing access.
Yeah, an opportunity for genuine relationships, right, with humans, right? That's great, thank you. So what did the community say? All right, so levy-wide, some of the things that we heard were parents want access. A lot of this stuff is familiar to you already. So they want access to high-quality programs and services, which are no low-cost transportation provided. Food was, important, very important, right? And then also parents want help, having their children go to schools that they want them to go to, not just what they can afford, right? So it's kind of like we're punishing people for being impacted by racism, right? When they should have the opportunity to have their children thrive as well. The community was very adamant that they want to plan, lead, deliver, assess, and evaluate services. So they want a deeper connection. They want to be involved in the planning process and carrying out opportunities. They're capable, able, highly competent geniuses, and I think we're missing out on them by not having them involved in some of these processes on a continuous basis. And then professional development, which includes cultural inclusivity, racial equity training, and then trauma-informed care. Funding allocation. So we asked the community to rank what they thought the funding priorities are. And so early childhood ranked first, after school ranked second, and hunger relief ranked third. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Hi.
Can I ask a question about that? Was that 3 choices force ranked, or were there other choices?
Yeah, there were all the levy program areas were
Okay.
choices. We picked the top 3.
I'm Nicole Sarah, and I work for RMC Research, and focus groups are my expertise, and Empress Rules designed the focus group protocol and facilitated the focus groups, and I did only the analysis piece. And I just wanted to say, I really wanted to give a plug for Empress Rules, because I I've sat in on a lot of focus groups, and I really haven't seen communities of color and marginalized populations share so openly. It's typically, I mean, it was quite evident in how Empress Rules ran those focus groups, so. But I really only did the analysis, so that's all that's all I take claim for. So in terms of the early childhood program area, this is across all three methodologies that were used: focus groups, provider survey, and the community survey, the questionnaire. There were, I think, it was quite obvious that individuals in these focus groups and in the surveys really are seeking culturally relevant services. Having bicultural staff, I remember a Tongan immigrant specifically saying what we really need is bicultural and bilingual staff coming to our community, people who represent our community, who look like us and who talk like us, as representatives coming to our community, but also in positions of power and not just power, but in positions, in a position to deliver the services. High quality childcare in preschool, hours that are convenient, that are open while people are actually working, meaning 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Understanding the impact of trauma and early emphasis on early literacy. Family and parent support. One youth said, I think parents need more help than the children themselves. Providing wraparound services to families. Parents are tired and overworked. Kindergarten readiness, encouraging a parent and child interaction, encouraging the school's interaction with families before school starts was really emphasized. Connection to medical providers, someone suggested, I think one person in a focus group suggested. Next slide. Again, information dissemination, bilingual and bicultural ambassadors. I mean, I think you'll see this throughout all 6 program areas. Having DHS make referrals for families to early childhood services. Children with disabilities, I think just providing resources for children with disabilities. Some providers described it as really just that area in particular, just lacking, just resources for disabilities.
Can I say one thing about that
Please,
too? There's like no after-school programs for children with disabilities. So they don't really have those options. Parents don't have those options. And so that was something that parents really was a major concern of theirs, and so I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. Providers also said in the survey in particular, which I didn't do any of the survey data collection or analysis, but that they themselves needed support. So on the one hand, you're seeing support for early childhood services and more early childhood services that are more meaningful and helpful to family. On the other hand, you're also seeing more support for families and support for the child and support for service providers who provide the child care and support to children. So in light of that, the providers suggested having an information exchange, having support groups, having union representation. And in terms of systemic issues, I think it's what Kiyoshi has already mentioned, and I think what we'll discuss a little bit more. Barriers to access to early childhood services include racism and poverty, immigration, not wanting to interact with places that hold power because they feel afraid in the current political climate.
This legal judicial system, so just not having say in what happens to their families, and lawyers and judges not being properly trained and understanding what families are going through. They're not connected, and so they're making these decisions that are having impacts on families, and they're not able to do anything about it. And so they would like them to be more educated. They need to do some training as well, and so that's something that the community would like to see.
I'm up again. So I think a key thing in hunger relief, and I've done focus groups related to SNAP in Portland and in Oregon, but access to culturally relevant foods. So going to a food bank, and I think the same Tongan fellow that I mentioned before, he said in a focus group, he was like, you know, there's this food at food banks, we'd love to know how to cook it, we'd love to eat it, we have no idea how to cook it. So providing some kind of foods that at food banks that people know how to cook, or providing training in how to cook those foods that are currently at food banks, that meets dietary restrictions, that has a partnership with farmers markets, and in particular, one focus group member, an African-American woman, said to support individuals, people of color who are growing the food.
And please don't give people food that's going to expire the next day. Have been through a lot of this stuff, which was just perfect candidate. Me and my sister have. We've been through this where we've gotten food and gotten sick the next day. People don't deserve that. Don't give food that you wouldn't give to your own family.
Yeah, that came up quite a bit. Providing meal prep classes, collaborating with grocery stores. These are just all of the ideas that were generated from community members. Providing training on budgeting, meal prep, food classes in community. These are themes that were echoed also in focus groups I've done on food insecurity in the past. Providing food boxes at Levy-funded programs, schools in the neighborhood, evening food banks. A lot of people talked about, you know, the food banks are all open at these different hours. I'm not sure how I don't know how to get to each. I can't keep track of when each food bank is open. So having food banks that are open in the evening. Transportation was a big issue. One woman talked about gentrification. Big grocery stores are moving out of my neighborhood. How do I take my kids on a bus and get food? And if I need to go to a food pantry, which aren't located in convenient locations all over the city, how do I get there? So people suggested mobile food banks, providing a transportation stipend. And then, again, I know it's probably not possible to have a food bank at every school. Maybe it is. But I think that the sentiment of this, having food banks at every school and school-based programs is, people were saying, I'm having trouble accessing the food that is available. And so if a food bank could provide it at my school, that would help a lot. People really praised the food programs that already exist at schools. School meals, school breakfast, but also harvest shares that are sent, or harvest shares that are provided at after-school programs, or backpacks that are sent home full of food. Having school gardens, community gardens, and then just an awareness of services, food services in general. There's a lot of talk of shame in the focus groups, and shame of accessing food banks, understandably. One provider suggested normalizing access to food banks and really advertising it. I mean, again, it's a great idea. And then having just more information on how to access food banks, when they're open, when they're making it logistically easy. And then shame and stigma, lowering the barriers to accessing services. I think particularly WIC and SNAP is that's what that is alluding to. Providing the backpack programs actually destigmatize food distribution because it's offered to everyone, you know? And then providing food at school events. So those are some of those are examples of how to reduce shame and stigma. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, after school, my favorite. This is where I grew up. All right, so kids need academic support, right? They need to get organized, can't have papers just everywhere when you open up the backpack. They need liaisons to be that kind of that operator between the school and the home, right? To just, kind of be that vessel to let them know what's happening in the home and what's in the school, and like how can we get, wraparound services to people that really need them. STEM was big, early literacy That's a big thing. Providing kids with books to take home, and low student ratios. So low ratios, not a lot of kids need that one-on-one individualized attention. Healthy relationship building and behavioral support. Match support, like you have mentors who want to participate and support kids, but they need that support. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to do it. They need training. Social emotional support was a huge thing. And just having kids, somebody mentioned the opportunity to just be kids, right, in a formal environment, because a lot of times it's like, do this work or do this thing, instead of just giving them a time to be with each other. And in my experience, that's why we lost a lot of kids, because they were hanging out with their friends right outside the doorway, instead of having a space where everybody can come in and do something. Culturally relevant, once again, classes, engaging classes. Kids are bored, so they get tired. They don't, they don't want to come. And so some things that kids specifically mention is that they want to learn how to cook East African food and more cultural programming and sports, specifically in the Tongan community. They wanted rugby. So I thought that was cool. Enrichment activities, people need life training skills, so stuff that actually matters, like how do you balance a budget, get your credit right. Like they should be thinking about that a long time ago, what they want to do with their lives, the connection between that and school. I think that's why we lose a lot of our kids, because they're like, why do I need this, right? And then sports exercise programs, like our kids are playing a lot of video games, and I don't know if you know what's happening with diabetes, but there's an epidemic that's happening, and it comes from just us not being active as humans, and that's something that we need to be successful. So we can't forget about how important that is in addition to academics. Mentoring, same thing, academic support, individualized support, that one-on-one mentoring, also just small group activities that they can do. More men of color. That was something that people were adamant about. Mentors with a shared identity is used, such as racial affinity, gender affinity, or gender identity affinity, different cultural things of that nature. They need someone who they can connect with, who understands their experience. LGBTQ plus, recreational sports, and then training. I would love for the Levy to be just like this social justice advocate for like the world, right? Where we, why not, right? Y'all are a government entity. So, where we're really pushing for people to be culturally inclusive and really care about what our communities need, and they need support, and they need it through training. They need, intentional spaces where they can learn about other communities so they don't come out and damage them while they're trying to help them. Kids need opportunities for relationship building and cultural experiences, new opportunities, social emotional support, specific interests that they have. And so kids are finding mentors through community-based organizations, faith-based, so like church, and regular members of the community who just do what they're supposed to do because it's what they're supposed to do. And it'd be great if the Levy could support some of those individuals who, who are doing this work with, some type of compensation. If they're doing it, they're carrying out the work, and intentionally support them so that we can have economic advancement, right, and empowerment, right, by empowering, giving them opportunity to do what they're doing already, right, which is what we need, right? Right, okay. Are you guys okay with me? Yeah. Okay.
Hello, my name is Afrida Davis. So the next part that I'm going to jump in and talk about is the child abuse prevention and intervention findings that we had. So three main areas within this area, within the child abuse prevention and intervention, is parent support, parenting classes, and wraparound support services and support plan. So underneath parent support, what our community said is that they need help identifying the signs of abuse. And just being aware of what's happening and helping educate other families to see what's happening. So not only within families and within the communities every day, but also in schools. One participant or a couple participants mentioned, the benefit of having, doctors be able to also identify these different risk signs and different things like that. I know we have a program in place that already does, like, you call the hotline in case you see signs of abuse and such, but what our community, or what I heard the community say, was the need for more understanding of not only how different cultures operate within around abuse and understand abuse, but then also the intersectionality of those cultural norms, and also the cultural norms of the United States, and our laws and how they're really different. We also heard, and also underneath that was, programs that let children know that abuse is not okay. I think in some homes and part of our cohorts, you heard community members state how, some families, this is just norm. This is how you discipline your child. This is how you raise your children. And children grow up in these environments thinking that this is how it's done. And so you see these cycles repeated. And so letting and getting information out there to youth to know that, this is not a norm. There are different ways of being. There are different ways of being disciplined or learning different ways and skills of problem solving within families. We also heard of community talk about the education around the U.S. laws regarding physical abuse. I think this one really came up with our immigrant populations and just not really understanding what the laws were, and just hitting these barriers and these walls and having their children taken for something that for them culturally is very norm. And so making sure that we're, on top of educating these families early, as opposed to, they're suffering the repercussions of something that they didn't quite understand. So we also heard, community members ask for parent meetups, having opportunities where parents can come together and commune and really discuss the struggles that they're having, or to celebrate with one another, and just be in space and have camaraderie around just being a parent in the community raising children. And lastly, underneath parent support, respite for parents. So parents having the opportunity to step away from, to regroup, to do whatever self-care is necessary so that they can show up and be present for their youth, for their children. All right, I'm move on to the next one. I'm seeing body language. I respond to body language, and so that's my pause. So on to parenting classes. A lot of our families mention around social emotional education and support, things around depression and anxiety and feelings of overwhelm. Number one, normalizing that and saying that these are common things that you feel around, raising families, balancing budgets, feeding, and all these different types of things. So normalizing this and providing the social emotional support necessary to continue to show up and be yourself and serve your family and your community as everyone wants. They also talked about just more education around raising their children and raising their families. I think one beautiful thing that Step Up does is, we have what is it called that we do with the parents?
Family Academy.
Yeah, we do. We do. I don't know. I no longer work for Step Up. But when I was at Step Up, we did Family Academy. And it was really amazing to see parents who have raised multiple children come in and say, I don't really understand what my teen is going through right now. I don't really know how to support them or help them. And these are people who have raised children or who may be on their first teen. And, so you make this assumption that, you've done it once before, you're fully prepared and capable of continuing to do this. Your next child or even your first child, and that's not the case, right? And so, having classes to help, parents manage behavior, manage the different social emotional things that come up with them. Connect, to connect, that's a huge one. How do you connect with a 14-year-old young woman who doesn't want to talk to you, right? And you're her mom, right? How do you do that?
Are you going to answer that question here? Because I know there's a lot of interest.
So these are parenting classes.
Mentor your child.
So as far as wraparound support and services, a service provider recommended that we should invest in programs that promote healthy empathy for families that are struggling, help for substance abuse, domestic violence, and mental health. Children and families specifically need programs that support these particular areas. And what I really want to highlight in that, the reason why we put this quote in there from this service provider is around the promote empathetic support for families struggling with these different things. No, we're good. So, if families show up and begin to receive these different wraparound services and such, and sometimes don't always feel as if people really understand or taking the time to understand the struggles that they have come through and are currently facing in order to provide the services that they need for their youth or show up in the way that their youth are needing at that time. So some empathy and some compassion and understanding of like, there are so many different barriers that our families face, and how do we give space and time and energy to that, and in addition to providing different wraparound services. There was also asked for support around addiction education, connection to different services and resources such as housing and food, financial support, financial stability, education, medical care, jobs, etc. Also around domestic violence supports, and this kind of came in hand with just around the child abuse piece around just youth and disciplining youth, as well as, domestic violence issues. Culturally things are different, and so how do you educate one another, or how do you educate different communities of the way that we do DV support, and when I say we, United States, and making sure that the support is culturally appropriate for the different families and communities.
Safe houses?
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So somebody had mentioned safe houses. Having experienced domestic violence, is the first time I've ever experienced anything like that. You don't know what to do, and as a parent, you don't know where to go or anything. And this person knows where you live at this point, and they know where your mama lives, and they know where your sister lives. And so how do you get out if you don't have money, or if you don't have parents or somebody you can go to that they don't know? And so support with just safe houses where families who do want to get away can actually get away and have some place where they're not going to be found until you can get a restraining order or get, law enforcement involved. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kelsey. And lastly, what I'd like to highlight that community said that they're wanting is mental health therapy and counseling for their children, parents, and other family members. To show up at the different groups in here from across the board, immigrants, disability, families of color, all say that, we need more, counseling support, more mental health support. Just really speaks to not only the time that we're in and just this understanding of how big mental health support and counseling is necessary for, most communities, but how aware they are of the importance of it for their communities and themselves. Next. So next I'm going to talk a little bit about our findings around foster care. I'm going to read a statement that a service provider made. So our foster care, yes, our foster care system desperately needs more foster care families, but it also needs current and new families who are truly committed to supporting children and who have the knowledge and skills to do so. DHS needs to better leverage community providers and funders to address this. Our foster care youth are disproportionately Black and brown, end up homeless, and are being trafficked. They are commonly the most commonly vulnerable population. We need ongoing, dedicated resources to support them. In addition to more healthy families fostering youth, we need other intervention services, including shelters, transitional housing, and programs that support them as they are aging out of the system and forced onto their own, often without family or other supports. There also needs to be LGBTQ plus specific resources, since this is another population disproportionately represented in foster care, homeless services, and program services for youth being sex trafficked. One thing that I found for me frustrating going through this is that I'm the type of person who wants to change all systems at once. So everything's on the table, let's change it all. And and being charged with really distilling information specifically for the Portland Children's Levy, you have to zero in your scope. But what this statement from this service provider highlights, as well as we've seen across the board, is the intersection of all these different services. And PCL does really amazing work in really getting down on the ground in the day-to-day and working with youth, and the need for that to branch out and be more in reverse intersect, is that a thing? Into these other services. And the need was just really clear our participants talked about culturally relevant and responsive programming or services, foster parents from the same culture. You know, in one of our immigrant groups, we heard, you know, immigrant folks talk about how, you know, their children are taken and then they're taken and put into either white homes or homes of other ethnicities, and then they're worried about their children losing their culture and their connection and their language. And, you know, how do you get these immigrant communities and how do you invite these other communities to come in and be a part of the foster care system and also be foster parents? Better screening, higher engagement with communities of color, so youth of color can be placed within their own communities. And then culturally specific programming, something that I think you've heard multiple times today. So foster parents and family support in reunification. Again, a really big thing here is mental health support. Understanding that some of the root causes to, you know, youth being taken is the need for counseling, the need for mental health support, and including that in foster families and such. Including bio parents in the planning processes. Foster parents. Current foster parents mentioned their willingness and desire to be working with bio parents, especially when knowing that a youth is going to go back and there's going to be a reunification process, seeing as for DHS that's the #1 goal for most cases that enter the system. Foster parents want to be a part of that process and help that reunification process. And then also removal prevention services. So how do you get further ahead of the curve before we get to this place where we wind up removing youth? Consistent relationships, and we had really great ideas around sibling nights and family or support networks and mentors and more family nights, and so nights in which, you know, everybody is invited out to come. So if you're in a foster home and you have 2 foster kids, but then you have 2 bio kids, you know, everybody within that family is invited to come out and participate in those services, as opposed to it just being the foster kids, just to create a stronger sense of community and stronger connection with community. And lastly, a request around trauma-informed care. So just making sure that trauma-informed care not only you know, it's not only with the service providers per se, but also with the families, the foster families, and also the education with the families themselves around that. And then again, culturally informed services paired with the trauma-informed services. So. Transition support. And this particularly, you know, I have some experience working with independent living youth. Youth are aging out of the system, and support around financial literacy. And Kiyoshi mentioned earlier about learning how to, you know, manage your credit and budgeting and different things like that. Transition guidance. So how do you be 18 and be in charge of your entire life? What does that look like? How do you transition and make that? And then also have someone there that's willing to help support you as you do that. Higher education and vocational activities and funding for that. So I know we do some work right now around funding and providing some financial support for youth that are going off to college, but how do we do more? How do we ensure that they are even more set up, you know, as they move on with their life? Behavior support. Lastly, behavior support. How to provide safe environments for children. And this is not only education with the families themselves, but also with foster families. Managing different behavior. This is one that we heard from foster parents themselves. So when you are a foster parent of a developmentally disabled youth, you know, what's that education around being more equipped to manage the different behaviors you see pop up? Or let's say you are a foster parent of a youth that's not necessarily categorized as DD, you know, but you see behavior things show up. How do you be equipped for that? And lastly, skill training for hygiene support. So I think that a lot of support in a lot of classes that I heard foster parents discuss were more around just working with youth, raising youth, and not a whole lot around hygiene support. So how do we better equip foster parents to have those really tough conversations around showering, around deodorant, around these things that we make assumptions are normed? Like everyone knows how to do these things, but we have to remember that our youth, we teach them how to do these things. So how do we teach foster parents to have those really, uncomfortable conversations with their youth?
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Afrida. That's great. All right, here's some of our successes and challenges that we had. So, like many, we had some language barriers. Most of our team speaks English and Spanish, and so we had to reach out for Somali, Russian, Tongan, and other languages, which is awesome because we got to make deeper community relationships and connections, and now I have people I get to work with in the future. We had some cross-cultural differences. Posting in the Facebook groups, I'm a social media person, and I'm Black. And so when I went in the one of the Russian groups, they wouldn't allow me to post. And somebody actually came and said, "Why are you in the Russian group?" Even though my posts were in Russian, written by native Russian speakers. And so that was a barrier for me. But the cool thing is that turned into like a really cool conversation about the levy and what we were doing. And in response, I wanted to know more about that community. And so we went to the Slavic Heritage Month, and that was really cool. And we got to connect with people who helped us out. And we got invited to the parent group, to the Slavic parent group, and I bought them some Danishes. And we also gave people $10 for doing surveys and everything too. So I got to kind of be like the Black Santa Claus. It was fun. It was fun. It was great. And I also developed new relationships. I really didn't have deep relationships with people from the Slavic community. So that was great. Access to, and then also the Tongan community. I luckily knew a Tongan chief who was nice enough to help me out with access to the Tongan community, but he had mentioned that because of language barriers, they often feel isolated. And that's the importance of those liaisons who are able to come back and come to them and let them know what's going on in their language. And so that they can participate, because they have a lot of great ideas. They're amazing, amazing people. Really, really cool people. Access to technology was a barrier. A lot of our families didn't have it, and so we had to get innovative, and so that's where those partnerships with the community-based organizations were great. We left some money with them. We had a sign-in sheet. We know that the communities are in integrity, the people that we're working with in integrity, and we allowed people to come and fill it out on their time when they could, so we wouldn't have to be, come back and, all that stuff. We wanted to be accommodating as we could to families. And so that's, we also brought our computers to different events so that people can just fill it out directly. And then we had some systems issues where some of our links didn't get shared. Sometimes they just ended up in the inbox. I know that as a service provider in my day, I was guilty of it. And it wasn't because I didn't want to share it. It's because I was tired. And so much stuff just comes in my inbox. And it's not like I don't fault, like they're doing great work. But part of it is one, being overburdened, because a lot of people are doing community engagement right now. And so they're going to these specific organizations and they're not being compensated for it. And so staff are being overworked and they're tired. And so that's something I found out. But communication is a huge thing. And I'm thinking that maybe the levy can kind of be that communication thing where all the communities can send their events to the levy, and we could have just like this beautiful community engagement where it's like all your resources, your 211, your food, all that, anything that has to do with the levy, things that they offer or related to that community events, is all right there. Communication. Lessons learned. Involve community members in the planning. That was my biggest learn, and that takes time. Community takes time. 8 months seems like it's a long time, but it wasn't long enough. Not to be in community the way that we want to be and the way that we have been and what we're used to. That resides, like, you can't just come to somebody's house and then get to business. You're supposed to sit down, have a coffee, eat some food, come over a couple times and get to know each other. And we didn't get the opportunity to do that because of time, right? So acknowledging and respecting the fact that there's different social constructs of time and to allow that. So time for community. And so what I would like to do is next time I do a community engagement project, and I recommend this for others, is to start with the most challenging communities to reach, or the ones that you have the least relationship with, and hire somebody from those communities to be on your team who speaks the language. So that's something that Empress Rules will be doing to model. We want to model that behavior. Attend events that are already happening. Stop asking community members, same thing with the food, to come over here. No, we know where you're at. We're just gonna come to you, and that was great. We had so much fun. We just came to these events. We had good food. We learned about different things that were happening in the community. We were giving out money and like they were helping us. It was just great. So stop asking community members to leave their surroundings, right? Be accommodating. And then to just build strong, real relationships. just genuine relationships, right? It can't be every 5 years that we go out to go cultivate relationships. We need to have this on a consistent basis, like genuine relationships. Okay, so time, kind of talked about that. Budget constraints, my initial proposal was for $159,000 to do exactly what we wanted to do. And I really wanted to do this for the community. And so I still did basically everything that I said I was gonna do for $159,000, and it cost me. I'm proud of it, but I lost time, right, with my family. And so thinking about different ways to engage the community on a consistent basis, this still gives smaller firms an opportunity to build capacity and be involved and empowered. But to realize that there's other ways to do things besides like reports and things. What we normally would do is we have a circle and people say, well, what's the problem? And then we discuss what the problem is, and then we come up with solutions, and then we say, who wants to do it? You know, and so that's a different way that we can also do things. And informal, right? We would like more Vietnamese and male representation. That's something that I want to focus on, is how to get dads engaged. That's also in some of the recommendations. A lot of dads were working, right? So just how to figure out how to get them involved. And then also more males involved in social, social work, right? Where are you at? In other places besides the executive director spot, right? I want to see you in other places too, right? And then we had a confusing question, and this could be a projection because that's one of the areas of growth is that, once somebody writes something, you can't really tell. But in the community survey, people said, they were not service providers, but they provided services. And what I think of, this is my perception of it, is I provide a service because I'm a mentor. I've been a mentor involuntarily I've had my mentee since she was 10, she's gonna be 21. Nobody pays me for that, but I do offer, I guess you could say, a service, but many people don't. Well, how'd you say it about value?
Oh, just I'm not assigning value to it in a monetary way, but it could be something that you are compensated for if you're in a role that's paying you for it, like mentoring, for example. So some people are formally paid for exactly the work that you're doing with that mentee, but you don't even think about it that way. That's just part of your livelihood. That's how you operate in your life.
It's my kid, that's my kid, and so that's how a lot of community members view it. So we're at the very end. Are you guys all right? Y'all with me? Okay. I'll just check it in. So deeper partnerships, right? So we have the opportunity to create stronger relationships. We would like the Levy, the community would like the Levy to build stronger partnerships between schools, housing. People need housing. We got to stop acting like that's not a major issue, right? So being advocates for housing vouchers for families, like the Levy is very strong and it has an influence. Social service agencies, private organizations, medical providers, libraries, and nonprofits to collaborate as a part of a connected network. I remember somebody gave the example of as an individual finger, you can't really do too much, but when those fingers come together, it packs a powerful punch. And so if we could have everyone act together instead of in silos, right? And then also have corporate responsibility, bring them into it, and show them what they can get out of it, because the community is amazing. And if you really want to experience exponential growth, sameness breeds sameness, homogeny breeds sameness. If you want to have something different, you need to engage in multiple perspectives. So, people are actually losing by being homogenous. Food pantries, help organizations that serve families establish, sustain, and maintain food pantries at their various locations, and bring those to the people, right? So in addition to that, one thing I love about some apartment complexes is that they have places like Human Solutions that have an office there. Bring that food there. There's 400 people who live there, right? And they're not living there because they're rich, right? So let's just drop off some fresh food and put up some signs. It's going to be gone, instead of having a whole bunch of food at this location that's great that nobody showed up to because they can't get there, right? And I think that just happened last week. To develop partnerships with lawmakers and enforcers to encourage them to have better relationships, real relationships with the community. Rest in peace, Nipsey Hussle. I have to bring him up. Somebody just posted how the police just did a tribute to him because he was working to build relationships between the community and law enforcement. And what he did, that was a beautiful impact. And I would love to see that here in Portland. I would love to see those relationships happen. That was great. So continuing the conversation. The people at the top, came from a service provider, and I thought it was great. The people at the top need to realize that they need insight from the people of the community, connecting with the people and understanding what their needs are, like food, housing, and money, to pay bills by more opportunities within the community, programs that help parents, and helping parents help the children. So some of the ways that the levy can do that, what I would love to see you do, is to advocate for families to receive housing vouchers, right? People who are suffering, give them an opportunity, advocate on their behalf. Advocate for policy change and mass incarceration and immigration reform so we can keep our families together and also stop losing all our dads for silly reasons, right? Advocate for not just our dads, but our families, right, are being destroyed because for silly reasons that don't need to happen because people are put in impossible choices, right, impossible circumstances, and so they make choices that if there was other opportunities, I'm sure they would choose differently. So let's create those opportunities for them. Let's advocate for school policies that support healthy and free options for children living in poverty, right? Helping them to choose the programs that they want to be a part of and the schools that they want their children to go to. Spanish immersion, different language immersion classes. Who wouldn't want their child to be a part of that? And music and all these other things that private institutions get to have, right? Why do our kids have to suffer? Bring fresh foods, pantries to where people live and visit frequently, so like churches, we mentioned housing. Change the levy mission to end racial disparities instead of reduce. Do you know why why do you think we should do that at all? Anybody know why we should change that at all?
It benefits all of us.
Absolutely, right? And do you think our behavior would change if we were trying to end something in comparison to reduce something?
I think that there are many, many things in this world that we need to change from reduce to end. Absolutely. That is aspirational, and it's a good place to begin.
Absolutely. My mission statement is to end racism, sexism, and ableism. And it's either we do it or die trying. But I feel like something that can start can also end. And if we come into what we're doing instead of like a job, but like an intention to end, then maybe our behavior might be different. Our outcomes are going to be different as well. To connect directly with immigrant refugee communities, we talked about that. So just having real, genuine relationships. To create parent groups that centered engaging fathers, right? Get dads involved. Create smaller grants for community-based individuals and small businesses who are already doing the work for free, right? You like that? Examine the levy capacity. This has been a wonderful experience working with the levy staff, but to support people, it takes a lot. It takes a lot, and I'm just wondering if they need additional support, and this may be an opportunity for the levy to have opportunity to integrate and have people from the community to be a part of the levy staff, people of color to be a part of the levy staff. To facilitate an assessment of average transportation costs for communities in specific neighborhoods. So if we're gonna have people traveling, like we should look at how much it costs for either food delivery services to come to them or for them to travel, and then give them vouchers for transportation. If you really want them to get there so they could take a Lyft or Uber or whatever they need to do. Fund, promote, and facilitate trainings for teachers and providers centering racial equity, cultural inclusion, and trauma-informed care. Like I said, this could be really great, something that the levy really kind of, pushes for, right? Is the leader for, right, of change. That's what we need. We need somebody to say this is very important, and this is gonna help our kids. Right, it's gonna help our kids. Hire people from the community to be a part of the Portland Children's Levy. I already said that. It's very important. Hold cross-cultural events. I think that there's a lot of times there's a Slavic thing, there's an African-American thing, there's all these siloing and differencing, but we are humans, right? And we need to have places for humans to come and connect that are cross-cultural, so we have an opportunity to share and to celebrate the great things that are happening as well as the challenges and how we can come up with solutions together every week or once a month instead of like once every 5 years, right? People of color need to be given positions of power within agencies that are offering these resources. That's a huge thing. We're not being represented in the executive, the boards or the executive leadership positions. However, we are on the ground making the least amount of money, doing the most work, right? And so that needs to change. And so it'd be great if the levy could advocate on behalf of, providers in that realm. Subsidize affordable, high-quality childcare. We talked about that. Just transparency. So a recommendation was to create a newsletter that gives an update on how all the programs are doing. So that way, it's not to to shame or anything like that, but to celebrate. And then also, if organizations need support, that the community can directly actually say, I can help you with that. And create a community-led advisory committee. So it's people from the community who would be there to support the levy when they have, when they're wondering about how to carry certain things out, if they need assistance. Also accountability aspects of it too. It's just like what I realized in doing this today and what happened in 2013 is that the challenges are still the same, and I don't want to come back. My hope is to not come back in 5 years and the community is still saying the same thing. So we need to change those things. So this just talks about just different ways that you can do it, and it'll be outlined in the report of just normalizing the racial equity framework. Operate with urgency, as if you're, some of our people up there, their children are impacted, but if this was your child and you knew that your child, there was a 53% gap between your child and some other child, and they're both human, they're both smart, they're both capable, I would have a problem with that. And so there needs to be more of a sense of urgency with that. To operationalize, implement racial equity through everything, through action, modeling, by integrating, like I said, starting by integrating the Levy staff, modeling that change that you want to see in the world. Data-driven, so taking measurements, to make sure that we're addressing specific needs and policy changes that need to occur instead of, like I said, instead of waiting, and having that relationship so we can have consistent feedback. And then just organizing, building capacity, and partnering with other institutions. We already talked about that, so I want to be redundant. Do you have any questions? That's Empress, by the way. So you said cool name. That's my daughter, Empress. I created this business for her because as a Black woman, I've experienced a lot of oppression, a lot of things that you would never imagine. I've been told things by white people that no person should ever be told, and I don't want her to experience that. And so I'm asking you, I'm requesting, I'm demanding that by the time it's her turn that it's different. And I'm here to support you. We're all here to support you. However, we can help you with that. But when it's her turn and all of our children's turn, they should be able to show up as humans and give the best that they can give. Their hair should not matter, right? The color of their skin, their gender, their ability. Right? If we had somebody who was differently abled in every construction project, do you know how efficient we would be? You know what I'm saying? Do you know how hard it is to change an adult in a stall that doesn't fit 2 people? We have to acknowledge what the real issues are that are going on in our community and be willing to analyze our systems and see if they're still working. Because our government is the same government that says I wasn't a human. And they agreed on that. And that scares me. So, are there any questions?
Questions?
Hi, everybody. Hey. Hey, great. Questions?
We'll have public testimony. First of all, I want to thank you and Empress Rules, the team, Kiyoshi, thank you. This has been a great presentation. It's been extremely thorough. I think you've given us enough materials that we could probably fund over the next, 40 years. I think you've covered all of the bases, which is important. Frankly, I'm really impressed with the community outreach process that you engaged in. I think focus groups are particularly important. I like the fact that you took the extra steps to really get out into the community and forge some personal relationships, which then open other doors that maybe help us see things in ways that we wouldn't see without that personal contact. You collected the data, you crunched the numbers, you've helped us prioritize because as you know, there's lots of different directions that we could go, but resources are limited. And so for us, it's really helpful to understand where are some of the key touch points that we could be engaged in. One thing that did occur to me as I was listening to the presentation, and it's always struck me just given my elected position, is how poorly coordinated we are in terms of the services we already provide. And as you know, we're one of the most food insecure states in the United States, yet we're really blessed to have the Oregon Food Bank here. They're, I think, one of the most highly effective, cost-effective, and innovative food bank structures anywhere in the country. I'd hold them up to any other program anywhere. And yet there's a lot of people in the community who are struggling, who still don't know how to gain access to those services. And I like your admonition across the board on all of these. We need to be where they are. I have one sort of weird question, and it's one I've struggled with for a long time, which is, where do we draw that line between, you know, I always hear, I hear, you need to be in the community, you need to be sitting around the table, you need to be personally engaged. I hear that on one hand. On the other hand, what I hear is, we don't want you, we want a culturally specific organization that already has the ear of the community, that knows the community, that trusts the community, that can understand what those needs are. Where is the right mesh point for us to both be respectful of the desire of the community to have its institutions outward-facing versus our role as the funders of this program? Where is our right place in all of this?
Yeah.
Help me understand that.
I'll speak to that, and then
Sure.
It's open, and it's open, right? I was saying my old supervisor's here. Thank you. I call him Uncle Ernie. As a supervisor, what I realized, my job is to simply facilitate and to support my staff. That's it. I try to make the least amount of decisions as possible. That's it. And so what I did was I engaged my team. So it looks like the community getting together and having a meeting and saying, okay, this is what we get organized, this is what we need. And then maybe you come over and they tell you, and then you go facilitate it. That should be, there really shouldn't be any thinking on your part, at least not mine. I tried to, like I said, I tried to do the least amount. But my job was to just facilitate what my staff needed. If they needed whatever resources they needed, whatever they needed to get the job done, that was my job. And so I would go talk to my superintendent, this is what they need. They need this, and that was it.
Is
That's
it
it.
possible for us to inadvertently blind ourselves from the needs of the community by contracting others to be our eyes and ears in the community? And if so, what structural recommendations would you make to us? In other words, if we delegate the responsibility to be in the community to a group or a community-based organization or a culturally specific provider, doesn't that create the opportunity for us to actually lose that direct connection? And if so, how do we counteract that?
Can I just say one thing? It doesn't have to be an either or.
Yes.
Like, I think that it, I want to hear what you
I
have to
heard
say,
you.
too.
No, we was thinking the same.
Okay. But I feel like it comes deep listening, because it is, I mean, you're sending people who are the most qualified and prepared and connected in a particular community to be the frontline listener or receiver or gatherer. And then your job as a facilitator or holding space for that and providing resources perhaps is to not only listen deeply, but hold up whatever comes back from that. You have so much power in helping to elevate that or to make it actually happen, ultimately happen. So I would just say caution us to think either or in that, because it might be a little bit of, you or, people who are representing government institutions maybe that don't look like the particular communities that are trying to be engaged or giving the insight, coming in and being present, but it might also be, a culturally responsive organization helping to facilitate or to be that person.
That's a thoughtful answer, and let me go in one more direction. Now I'm going to go to the breadth question, which is one advantage of us contracting with organizations is we can go a lot broader. We can be in more areas. As I was looking at all of the different categories and all of the different areas and all of the different recommendations, obviously 5 of us up here, when we have all 5 of us here, we can't do that. We don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the breadth, we don't have the capacity. So we rely on these organizations to go broad and to go deep for us. And so there's that trade-off as well. By being a contractor agency, in effect, we can serve more people in more ways. but I'm just always mindful of this question of how far and how deep can we go before we become disconnected, or alternatively, people feel that we have become disconnected. And I appreciate your responsiveness to that. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question in return?
Sure.
Where do you feel like you see the disconnection? If you do see it, where do you feel like you see that disconnection?
I feel sometimes, and I'll be honest, I'm bringing a certain bias into this room, and I want to be very clear about that. And I am bringing my budget hat into the room with me.
Your what hat?
My budget hat.
Okay.
I'm in the process of doing the first draft of the city's budget, which is a very daunting task. And we have had a number of, a sharp increase in reported hate crimes in our community and in our state. And of course, this mirrors data nationally, just in the last few years. And some cities have chosen to empower groups. We have empowered a broad coalition in the community to help us ascertain where are these issues happening, how many are happening, who are they happening to, and how can we best respond. Other cities have said, no, we will take that process and bring it internal because the community wants to see that we are personally engaging in this issue and we are out in the community engaging in a particular way. And so we're having sort of this back and forth about how much of this should be done externally through community partners versus how much of it should be brought inside and have the public see that we are prioritizing this, and this is a serious issue, and we want to put our time, talent, and energy directly behind it. And so that's what precipitated my question to you.
Yeah, it sounds like an assessment needs to be made, just like an assessment to see what the needs are. I love talking to racist people, and one of the things that I do is I have to understand their perspective, because I don't understand, like, people are going out, they're hurting and hating people based off of what? Like, I'm curious to know why, how did you get there?
Right.
Because once I understand their perspective, then maybe I can ask them something called the essential question, right? Which is that bridge. So somebody who says, I'm just going to give an example that, all black people are lazy. I'll speak on my, my community or whatever. I would ask that person, well, what makes you say that?
Yeah,
so
where'd
that I
it
can
come
understand,
from?
where did that come from, right? And once I get that, my next question might be, well, so I'm hearing you say, I would restate what I heard them say, and then I would say, how many black people do you actually have deep relationships with? And I think a lot of it is because of disconnect and education. People don't know the history, and so they only know what they've been told, and people have been racially isolated. And so that comes at a cost, and that cost is suffering. You have people of color and white people going through the same thing, and they're all being oppressed by the same oppressor, which is not each other. And they don't even know that. And so divide and conquer is something that has been used since the beginning of time. And I think if people are educated and we have more community events or just someone who can connect with those isolated communities who are doing these things, you know what I mean? To just have honest dialogue, and opportunities for that. Like we just had something small I did was on my page because I saw something about asking questions. So I said, white people, go ahead and ask people of color whatever question you want to ask, and people of color feel free to answer. And I did the same thing on the other side of it. And people asked questions and had real dialogue, and people really got answers. But there's no place, nobody is offering these spaces for people. And so people are afraid to say things, they're afraid to interact. One person does something to you, you don't have a counter narrative because you're isolated, you don't ever see any more people again. And so now your friends are telling you this thing, and now all of a sudden you're a white supremacist dude, and that's not even who you were. You might have gotten into a fight or altercation with one person, and since you don't have any other narratives around you, say, no, these people are great. Like, come over here, let me show you. You know what I mean? Then these things just grow. And you know what happens when you let wounds fester? You have to get an amputation. And people they're suffering. So creating spaces for that would be great. Maybe in here. This is a nice place for community discussion and dialogue.
I don't have a question, actually, but I did want to make the comment that first of all, I really, really appreciated your thorough work of going into the communities and I mean that in plural, communities, and bringing all of this back to us. And I also see value in how this is being brought back to the service providers, all of the organizations and programs that the Levy currently funds, because some of the suggestions that you raise, I know those are being done in those organizations very effectively, and we've funded some of those, but there's obviously opportunity to do more, and I think this is a great place for you to have shared this, and I know that for those organizations that are represented in the room today, they have an opportunity, and they will be able to see the report, and those are ideas and things that they probably, many of them have already discussed. And so it has value beyond this allocation committee. So I want to thank you for that.
Kiyoshi, if you had one priority of all of the recommendations that you see really as a top priority that we as trustees could implement, what would that be?
One priority?
That you could really see. That we as, because part of what the mayor is really talking about is like, we have a role here, and then we have wonderful staff, and we have wonderful contracts with wonderful service providers. But when you were doing your focus groups, you were doing all of this community outreach, and you came back and you said, the trustees really need to know this. This is one change that they could really look and implement, and it could have significant change. Because doing the work that we're doing, which is difficult work, which is lifelong work, needs progressive movement forward. So I want to make sure when your daughter is of age, that when you come before us, that she can see that the progress has been made, right? What is something that you can see as us as trustees being able to monitor and look at it in your recommendations, that we can really see that progress is made?
That's a really tough question.
And anybody else can answer it too.
Yeah, I would like to open this up too. Can I call a friend? Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, if I may, I appreciate that question. I think that, I mean, here we go getting into questions, because I have another question in response to that, and I think that kind of may answer what you're asking. And my question is around, how much attention are we paying to where communities and governmental programs are intersecting? And those relationships are there, that are there. And so I think that we see our contracts and our agreements and our obligations and our outcomes, and we see all these ability things that we go down the list to make sure that we're hitting, we're not hitting, we're adjusting here, we're adjusting there, and there's a relationship at the core of that. And so when we're moving into communities and we are disconnected, if we're in a position of power, we're disconnected from that community, we're connected by some type of line, and how much attention are we paying to that relationship there? And how do we put more attention there? How do we create more care there? So Mayor Wheeler may not be able to walk into, my neighborhood and be like, yo, what's up, right? But there's a connect there. He's connected to someone there. And how are you paying attention to that connection there to build that relationship to then bolster the relationships that stem from that initial relationship?
Frida said what I was thinking. No, she didn't. But the first thing that I could think of, honestly, is just including them in the planning process of everything. That's it. This is what I feel like sometimes. In my work, I feel like I'm kind of like the white male whisperer, where I'm like talking through white people to tell them to do stuff. But if I was there, or somebody who was living in it was there, you wouldn't have to do that so much. And I feel like the resources that are allocated to educating white people could actually go directly to the community. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges, if you want to keep it real. So hiring people, having more people up here, more people over there, where there's a heartbeat and that direct connection. I mean, it is about the relationship.
Any further questions?
Yeah, great. That was a great comment, and really appreciate all the good work. And some of the stuff you suggested today is systems level, or we require, everything from changing the levy's language to more of a soft pivot. But most of what you talked about today was program level. And as Julie mentioned, you know, it feels like we're missing an opportunity if we just post it on the website and send the report out, because you guys have spent time with the community who is receiving most of these services that we fund. And I would like to see us think about if there's a way that we can do it that doesn't just add burden to an already heavily burdened frontline staff in our program areas. But if we could find ways for you folks, the folks that were actually in the rooms with these folks, to sit with the providers, I think it could influence and inform services that we're already paying for and they're already providing. So, you know, I don't know what that would look like, but it just seems like it's an opportunity that we should think through at this point.
I like
Very,
that.
very good. So I don't mean to shut this off, but this great presentation.
Yep.
Thank you. Do we have public testimony on this item? All right, so Lisa, I think you're up next then, correct, to tell us a little bit about where we go from here?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent report. Thank you.
Not like Wednesdays. It's the opposite of Wednesdays.
Oh, yeah, yes, it is. Thank you. Well done.
You often get applause on Wednesdays.
No, he does not get applause on Wednesdays.
Well, it's kind of like thank you, but not exactly. Greetings. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Therapy. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is not going to be as entertaining or as deeply and amazing as that, but I wanted to make sure that we took the next step in thinking about small grants, because at our last meeting, you all indicated that you were interested in going further with this and sort of charged us with coming up with some flesh to put on the bone, so to speak, of what a small grants fund could be. And to capitalize on what Kiyoshi just told you around small grants and hiring different people, those would feed into this. So reminding you all, the PSU report, Rebecca, and the PSU report, qualitative report, recommended that we look into this to provide better equity of access to our funding to other types of organizations in the community, particularly organizations that are not able to compete successfully for our funds in the regular competitive round, and who might be serving communities that we're not reaching as deeply with the investments we're currently making. So we took a little further look into what is a small grant and what kinds of small grants funds are out there to try to get an understanding of what the range might be for small. There are both governments and foundations that do small grants. So you've got very small grants, as low as, say, $500 that might be given for events or for projects. And then you've got grants that might be up to $100,000 that are considered small for particular funds. So the scale of the fund that's giving out the money has something to do with what is considered small. In our community, just to give you some sense, All Hands Raised gives out grants to schools, mostly for ongoing staffing types of grants that range from about $20,000 to $50,000. Beaverton, as Felicia talked about, I think that was a couple meetings ago, gives out social service fund grants, and those are $20,000 grants to organizations of varying sizes. Oakland, which has a children's levy of a similar size to our children's levy, doesn't do a small grants fund, but they do offer a designation for people applying, organizations applying, as a small or emerging organization to apply for grants. And those applicants have different standards in terms of applying for the grant, the size of grant they can get, the amount they can put toward indirect, things like that. So there are different ways of doing it, but I would say that gives you some, and their small grants, I think can be no more than 100,000, so 20 to 100,000. So that gives you sort of a general sense of range in what's out there, and there's sort of more stuff I put in the memo. I won't go into all of that now, but that gives you an idea. Keep in mind that the total resources of the fund also influence what people do, and as well as the amount of the number of grants they may want to give. So all of those factors can fit into it. So to remind folks, the reason that we're trying to do this is to improve equity of access for smaller organizations, to fund organizations that are growing up out of communities, to serve their communities, and to give them an access into these public resources, possibly to reach children and families that we're not reaching, and to certain communities that we may not be reaching in the regular funding round, and then also to build capacity in smaller organizations to be able to compete for our money, the idea of growing the next round of applicants for levy funding down the line. So getting into particulars now, I'm going to throw out a bunch of possible particulars. Staff is not married to any of these things. We've given you some, and I'll repeat what some of the rationale is. The idea of going through all of this is to get to understand what your reaction or thoughts might be, to hear direction from you all about things you might not want to do for sure, or to have some discussion about that. You can hear some testimony if any folks in the room want to give it. And then if you are interested in proceeding after you kind of get to some sense of what it might be, and then we would take it out for further input on some of those particulars. So that's sort of the big picture of where we're trying to go today. With putting this stuff up. It's not meant to be a firm line in the sand on anything, and we're not making a specific recommendation necessarily that we go forward with it as it's presented today. There's still time to change what those parameters might be. So for proposed size of the fund, we were putting forth about $1 million to $1.5 million for the fund, which is about 1% to 1.25% of the total revenues that would be available for grants. The idea would be to try to pilot this and understand if we were being effective in addressing those purposes I just spoke about. So we would be able to do it and then look back on it and understand, do we make any difference with those goals. For startup and timeline things, I want people to keep a few things in mind. I think we would probably need either a 0.9 or a 1.0 FTE additional to our current staff to do this work, partly because there's some research that would need to be done on the front end out there that we haven't done yet since we don't know if we're going forward with it. Usually takes 2 to 4 months to hire somebody at the city, so in terms of thinking as we project out where that might be, it's likely hire somebody if we could do it in the fall. So in terms of rolling out a small grants fund, my guess is that it's probably the fund itself wouldn't begin making grants until not in the 1920 fiscal year, but in the 2021 fiscal year is most likely. I mostly wanted to make people realize that it takes a while to get that all rolling and get it all set up, and that whoever that person was that was going to run small grants would need to create the process and be out in the community doing listening to what Kiyoshi said already, but be doing additional work to find the kinds of organizations that would be the right candidates for this sort of money. Grant size, that's right now in the 2014 funding round, the minimum grant was $50,000 a year, or $150,000 for the total request. When we're looking at that for our next competitive round, staff will likely recommend to increase that just based on inflation to $60,000 per year for annual grants and $180,000 for 3 years. So with that as a minimum for the regular competitive grant, if you just assume that for the moment. Anything under 60 could be considered small, because that's the bright line where we would divide sort of being competitive in the regular funding round for the larger grants. It doesn't have to be that high, but it could be. So we're not advancing a particular number, but that just gives you some sense of parameters. I think you'd have to think about, in terms of a minimum level, be considering that if these are for service, if we're providing money to both deliver services and increase organizations' capacity to do that in their communities, but also hopefully fund their ability to increase their capacity in other ways. For instance, in doing data and reporting and those kinds of things that we require we always are going to require some of that. So how can we help build that up? And if you don't have the expertise or the staffing to do that. So I would just caution against making minimum grant, to make sure there's enough of a minimum grant there that organizations could do those two things. So that sort of size range. In terms of the type of organization and the service populations that this fund might be targeted for, I think likely there need to be some more research on what types, what are the needed or what organizations are providing services in levy funding areas that are not currently funded by the levy, because that would be the other thing, is try to fund organizations we're not currently funding, and that are at the right stage of development. So ideally, organizations that have some paid staff, and to keep in mind, we are subject to the legal requirement to not be more than 30% of somebody's annual budget. So some organizations applying for this fund would still need to have other funders. So not probably all volunteer staff, still some other funders, but could be on the smaller side and smaller than most of the organizations we currently fund. So that's would be looking for organizations in a particular stage of development that are hopefully serving communities that perhaps we're not reaching, or growing up out of communities that we're not aware of. And the idea, again, would be to have organizations that are not competitive in the regular round, so not organizations that are currently funded or have been funded in the last round. Okay, so the last thing I'll say before to open up for questions and thoughts, just around levy legal requirements, because folks were concerned about those issues, and I wanted to make sure we had addressed them. And I've given you a lot more detail in the memo, which I won't repeat all of that now, but just to say, of course, organizations would have to be providing services in the areas that we fund and are required to fund. So we are legally required in the current ballot measure to fund in those 6 areas. The grants, in terms of dealing with reporting and data, which was I know some folks raised those concerns, the grants can include funding to help build up that capacity. And that can be either through staffing, it could be through technical support. There's a number of different ways you can accomplish that, but I think that is something that could be addressed. And also with an additional staff person, potentially devoted to fewer grantees, could help provide some of that support one-on-one. I mean, we already do that for grantees as staff, those who need it. But if you've got a large field of folks who all need it, then you're going to need probably some additional capacity there. But I don't think that's staff's opinion as a whole, as we talked through it, was that's not a hard stop or barrier. That's something that we can put resource toward and see addressed. The 30% rule, as I mentioned, still applies, so we do have to, organizations, we couldn't supply more than 30% of somebody's money, so you have to keep that in mind. Around the issue of proven programs and funding proven programs, I think we have to keep in mind that there are smaller organizations aren't necessarily or by definition less likely to offer less proven or not proven interventions. So the ways in which any organization who comes to us and wants us to fund a program that is not currently being delivered is always relying on either experiential or research evidence to say why they think this intervention is worth doing. They either have done something similar in their community, they've seen research that shows these types of interventions are effective with youth, and they want to continue or expand something or move into a slightly different area. So organizations in their applications are already doing that, and you are already funding. And I know we have a fair number of new people here, but we are already doing those things. And I think, having some kind of application process where we're testing for that, we're testing for their either experience in doing this and some way to characterize that experience and describe and explain it in a persuasive way, or in some cases, research that are specifically talking about an intervention they want to do or are positing to do. So I think that reminding ourselves that we allow and we continue to expand services in the community by looking at this type of evidence, I don't know that smaller organizations would be any less well-positioned to do that. So I don't think that's a significant barrier in doing this type of fund and being worried that we were funding something that was less, quote-unquote, less proven than what we might fund in the regular round. And just also to keep people in mind, anybody can fail on implementation, no matter how proven the intervention is, and we can't forget that. That's the big programs, the big agencies have all had situations where that happens for any number of reasons, and that can happen in a smaller organization too. So I don't know that either organizational size or the research or experiential background you bring into a proposal is necessarily going to be determinative of its ultimate success. You have to have implementation success that rests on all the humans doing the work. So I think that I want you to keep that in mind as you think about proven. I don't think it's an impossible standard to meet with a small grants fund. Okay, I'll stop. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. I would encourage any kind of discussion. And then if you want to hear from the audience, whoever's in the audience, we'll kind of try to wrap up as we go from, as I understand, kind of where your thinking's going.
Well, I just want to thank you for the great work. The memo was awesome, and the amount of work that you guys put in between our last meeting and this one to get us to this point was yeoman's work, so thanks for that. And I guess I'm more open than I originally was after, to read the memo. However, I do feel like we need a little more precision on what we're focusing on before we start designing a program. And, just to be honest, my bias is to our third bullet, which is reach children and families who may not be served by organizations typically funded by the levy, meaning reaching kids and families that we're not serving. And to me, that is an absolute North Star and something we ought to be focused on. And so when I think about how we're going to design a program to accomplish that, I start with saying, okay, what's the size of that pool? How many kids and families aren't we reaching now? And what does that racial, ethnic, demographic, economic look like? So if we don't know who we're trying to reach, I don't think we're going to do a very good job of designing a program to reach them. And then I would say, now that we know the pool, do we want to prioritize? Do we want to prioritize by race, ethnicity, geographic location, economic, whatever? We prioritize now, right? So, and once we do that, and I think we'd have to do that based on program, because every program's a little different, so the pool we're trying to reach is probably a little different in each program. But then I'd say, okay, so I'm sure most of the kids and families we're talking about are kids and families of color. So what currently we're funding culturally specific and culturally responsive programs. And are they not reaching the kids we're trying to target? And I think the answer is yes, because we wouldn't be starting a new program or thinking about it if they were reaching them. So aren't they not reaching them because they can't find them? Are they not reaching them because they can find them but they don't know how to engage them? Or are they not reaching them because they don't have the resources to reach them, but otherwise they're qualified and able to reach them? Those are the kinds of things that I think we should explore so that we can then create a program that will target the kids and families that we're trying to reach. And it'll inform whether $1.5 million is the right number or it needs to be twice or 3 times as big or half the size based on what we know about who we're trying to reach. So anyway, I like the idea. I think we're making progress, but I just would like to be a little more precise about that.
Just in response, I would say that my guess is that there's kids and families in multiple demographics that are not being reached. And you have to remember also capacity of Levy programs. I mean, we serve, if you just took the bald number, maybe 8% of the population of kids in Portland. So, I mean, it's like you have to remember that there's many, many reasons why different groups may not be reached by any set of programs that you're offering. Could be geography, could be the type of organization, it could be many things. I don't know. I agree that we could get more precise. I don't know if I can be definitive about that. So just to keep that in mind.
I would just want to know that we're not creating, you'd said you need 0.9 to 1 FTE. If you're dealing with smaller organizations, I'd want to know what the nature of those organizations are. Are they newer organizations? Are they organizations that might have fewer controls in place? Ultimately, this is a levy. It has to go back to the voters for approval. Anything that we do that creates a problem or a perceived problem, or if there's an oversight issue, or if there's a conflict of interest that we don't discover, that obviously impairs our ability to get this levy renewed. And I just want to make sure, what's the relative benefit of a smaller organization versus the relative trade-off in terms of potentially missing some of the administrative issues that perhaps a larger, more established organization would already have worked out through systems and protocols.
Yeah, those are real concerns. And there'd have to still be some level of controls. The city contracting requires a certain level of standards you have to meet.
And can 1 FTE reasonably do that?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, and then the next question is really related to what Mitch said. I might phrase the question slightly differently, which is not who's not being served, but once that population is identified, why can't they be served by the existing organizations that are currently being funded? Why, do we need necessarily to go to a smaller organization in order to be able to serve that population?
Well, there's many differing opinions about those kinds of questions, and I think it depends on the community and it depends on the organizations involved, and you'll get different answers from different people depending on who you ask. So I think part of what we heard in the PSU report was that there's equity of access issues to our funding, and that only certain organizations are of a size and sophistication and also have the resources to put toward the level of grant application and general, reporting we require, that to try to incubate or help organizations rise to that level is part of the idea. So it's not just, it's about population, about it is about who's being served, but it is also about the organizations who do the serving, who are growing up out of community and are trying to get to that, as I think it was said, the quote in the PSU report was, who's the next SEI? So, I think SEI would tell you that of course you should give them more money and they will do everything. But there are many organizations and many people out there who have differing opinions. So in listening to different sides of that coin, this is sort of an attempt to address that. because there are differing thoughts about who gets, rather than just growing the organizations we currently fund, other folks would say, no, we should fund other organizations that are coming up from the bottom.
Okay.
Strictly for the value of that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. You look like you were about to say something.
Well, I think what I'm hearing you say and what is that it's, I appreciate you reminding us about the PSU analysis, that it's not unlike the idea of the city or other entities contracting with minority-owned businesses, that there's it does have to do with some making more opportunity in the broader community that has other value or additional value. And in this case, it may be that it is to help, particularly in communities of color, where people may be more willing to access a service if it's being provided by an organization that they have some kind of trust or confidence in, and that may not be one of the large organizations. So
Well,
if it
that's
can
the bottom
improve
line.
access, and we won't know that unless we tried it, perhaps.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's it.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wasn't going to say anything, so go ahead.
I jumped again. You weren't going to say anything.
I was not going to say anything.
Okay, great. I like the idea. It sounds like you're approaching this as a pilot project. And I always like a pilot project because there's a lot of unknowns here. There's two concerns I have based on experience. Number one, the smaller an organization is, the more it's dependent upon the founder. And we run into this all the time, where the founder decides to move on or leave, and the organization just sort of goes kaboom. And then we're left holding the bag. I want to know that part of what we do is succession planning. If we're going to build capacity, succession planning has to be part of it, in my
That's a
opinion.
good point.
Because we keep running into this trap over and over again.
And it's not even just with small organizations,
No,
frankly.
we've run into this with some rather sizable, which is
Yes.
surprising, right? I mean, one
not
would
that
expect
surprising,
that
but-
to be,
You'd like to hope it wouldn't be, but I've seen it again and again.
yeah. And I don't remember what the second one
Okay,
was, so it
well.
wasn't important, forget about it.
Okay. You know where I work.
I do, I know where to find you.
I'm actually a fan of a small grants program because I think it's the equitable thing to do. Because what I see as a person of color, what I really see that comes out of a small grants program is innovation and being able to serve communities that you don't know that you're not serving. Because when they look at the process that we have, as someone that's done the grant review for the Children's Levy, it can be daunting. And I really feel like if we had a smaller grants program, we'll be able to serve something like the Tongan community, like Empress Rules just pointed out. What I see as being on the board of All Hands Raised, our small grants program is really around equity. I also help administer Nike's community
Right, you
fund.
mentioned that,
And I've seen organizations I've never heard of coming out of that small fund. And from there, that small fund then becomes a new organization, and that new organization is doing amazing things because I think the Children Levy, as you just said, we're hitting 8% of children. So if we can find a way to increase access to serving our most underserved populations, I think that's critical. And I think 1% of our budget as a pilot is something that that Empress Rules really said that this is urgent and needed now. And I think that this is our way as trustees in the levy to be able to respond back to this report, in my opinion. And I don't think you can do it without additional staff. Every grants program, whether small or large, requires individual staffing. And I think 0.9 is reasonable. I actually think it might take a full staff position for this. I wouldn't be surprised because it's new, but there's one point that I would really emphasize, which I heard from the consultants before us, is I think communities should be part of this planning process.
Well, that will, again, that's time, as she pointed out. So
Exactly.
that's partly why I wanted to make sure I set people's sights to understand that if this, and that's partly where I come to your point, Mitch, like I would be hesitant to be dictating too much at the front end and be asking this person to come in and try to answer those questions that you asked, but to do it in a way with the community so you are coming back with some genuine information from the folks who are living it. Because you don't know what you don't know. This is the problem of life. And so, it's, I don't know that we as staff are going to have all those answers before you need to make up your mind whether to try it, but I think it's worth the try to understand it better. And I think that person working in community would come up with those answers. I mean, again, if I'm not saying that you could try and fail, it's possible, but, I think it's got a decent chance of success, and I think it is something we should be looking at as a way to offer a different type of grant process for organizations to have more equitable access.
And I think we also have a roadmap with just our report here, and we have outreach, we have focus groups, I bet you if we went back to these same groups, they could really help us with this small grants program. So I don't think it's going to be as much work, but I think what's important is the intentionality behind it, is making sure that whoever we hire, that they must do this with the community. Because I think it will help us as trustees as well, because I think it adds a lot more validity for the voters as well to say, this small grants program wasn't just created by the trustees and staff, but it was created by the community, you tax-paying community. It wasn't just us. I think that adds a lot of weight when we go back with the levy and ask them to fund us another 5 years.
Okay, I have some idea for next direction. Do you want to see folks, I know we are really down, does anybody want to speak to it?
Any public
Before-
testimony on this item? Come on up. No, you got to come to the microphone. That's the
Yep.
rule.
Yep, you have to come.
No cheating.
So personal, local, and immediate as one of those innovations that just popped up. Thank you for investing in me. I exist now that you've been labeled. What I would really appreciate as a small business who really wants to do the work and is not going to go anywhere is to have an entrepreneur pipeline. So I think that would be helpful because we have been excluded from opportunities in leadership, how to write grants, all those things we've been excluded from, but we've been doing the work. So we know how to do the work better than anybody else. But how do we get the grants? How do we do our business taxes and not be, the government is very punitive. So if you mess up on your taxes, that's another way that you can go. I've seen organizations go out in that way as well. So if you had like a social responsibility to kind of have an entrepreneurship pipeline where people who have innovative ideas and are already in the community, already doing the work, but don't have that, however you want to say that, the paperwork aspect of it down, and just supervisions, things of that nature, if they could get support with that, then they'd probably be more likely to be more successful and have longevity. I will say that working in the program that I used to work at, when I came into organization, it was 60% on track to graduate. When I left, it was 97%. And it's still killing and thriving because I empowered my team, right? It wasn't just a patriarchal type thing where there's one leader, right? We have to like decenter that and create something that's more collective so that if somebody does decide to leave, the next person already had leadership training. They already know what to do. They already know how to continue the legacy, right? So just kind of like changing how we do things a little bit. If that's, yeah, but that 30% is scary because I don't know how we need support with fundraising. How are we supposed to do that, right? If I really want to build capacity, I got to get how much money in order for you to give me $30,000, right? When I've been excluded, my friends aren't white. Like, I don't have rich white people I can call and say, hey, can I get some seed money? And I'm a woman. If you look at the headlines today, Serena Williams, like, women only get like 2% of seed money, right? And so we need support. So I think the grants is that's an excellent idea. I think you will be able to reach people that you've never reached before because we're closer to the ground. So that's it. Thanks.
So this, by the way, is an excellent point you're raising, and I appreciate your saying it, but it also raises a question. And the question is, looking at the role of this levy and looking at our fiduciary responsibility, where does capacity building come in?
Well, I mean, I think you can do it within the
we wanna
grants
get
that
in?
you make. And I think, so you can increase capacity to, I mean, a lot of organizations, I think you heard from Linton last month, I'm sorry, about we are doing great work in our community. We would love to do more of it. We would love to support more children in our preschool program, but we don't have the money. So, I mean, there are people who are, and they are a small organization, who want, I mean, so there's just an example of a group that wants to have more capacity to serve, to provide services to more people, but who also might need, in order to do the kind of paperwork, reporting, those kind of things, if you want to support, you need a one FTE person who's going to help provide some support on the application side.
Right,
We
but
currently
here's-
only
here's
provide
my-
minimal support.
Here's my point,
Right,
Lisa.
so-
I don't think one FTE is going to cut it. I mean, you just raised what I thought was an excellent point. And what you said was, it's not just about my organization has a unique perspective or unique approach or reaches unique people. I need help with administration, with fundraising, with the other things that come with running an organization. And my question is, do you want to be doing that?
Well, there's going to be a limit to how much, I mean, we cannot take, I think the most grassroots organizations are probably not going to be a target for this fund, because you are going to have those kinds of issues, and there are city contracting issues. The city of Portland does offer some very small grants, so I mean, there are ways to do it. So, I mean, I'm going to, we'll figure that out.
And maybe
But
there's some
I think there is, you know, we're not talking about the most grassroots, but we're also talking below needing $60,000 and being able to handle $60,000 a year in grant, right? So there's something in between that, and I think that's where we would be aiming, ideally. I mean, I'm saying this as I sit here now, but I could be wrong, and if we go further down the path, we may learn we're wrong, but that's what I'm imagining, and those are the kinds of organizations that I'm aware of, at least at this juncture.
Yeah.
I know you're going to have to scoot. So does it work to shop this general idea out in a larger group to see what and then bring that feedback back to you at the next meeting, and you can kind of think about that and make some more progress in
Yes.
May?
Yes,
Most definitely.
supportive.
Okay.
Head shakes
Yes.
all around. Good.
All right, thank you
Do we
all.
need to do this next piece, or can this
No,
be
we'll leave
held off?
that, no, which one?
The item number 3, changes
No,
to
no,
public.
we're going to just delay it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who else wanted to testify? Come on up. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. I apologize. Is there anybody else?
Do we miss anybody?
I decided not to speak.
Oh, well, I'm glad you
My
did.
name's Louise Williams. I was born in Portland, Oregon, graduated from Beaverton High School. And I'm not a woman of color, but I come from child abuse. Child abuse is not just from the color population. It is from all populations. And that means people of wealth as well as poverty. With my experience of years until I was 22, I was able to start a charitable trust in India for the prevention of child abuse through education. And it was education of parents, teachers, and child care providers, as well as pediatricians. There I worked with the government of India, I worked with UNICEF, and I worked with the major community. And believe it or not, you know where child abuse was the highest? The wealthy, not the poor. I cried. And child abuse in India, the facts are higher than here. But due to health, after living in India for 13 years, I had to retire. And I do understand that a charitable trust needs to be set up so there is a successor. Because when I retired, I had no successor. And I'm here in Portland, and I came because I have become a peer support specialist, and my focus is child abuse prevention, but it's really education on how to be good parents and to take the prevention out of it. Because if prevention is in my words, child abuse has to be in existence for my organization to be in existence. And I know that child abuse and children suffer from all economic values. And I met a woman of the African community who told me, we don't want special rights, we just want equal rights. And we need to treat each population in this country, in this city, equally. And if I would be an immigrant to Portland or to the United States, I would want to be more like in the United States. Because when I went to India, there were no Americans. I was among the Indians. And I learned their culture. I learned how to cook their food. And I learned how to speak their language to the best of my ability. And I think that what the city of Portland is doing, and because of becoming a peer support specialist, I found out about your organization. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing. And I think what she is proposing is very good. There are entrepreneur organizations for social entrepreneurs where they learn exactly what this other woman was stating. They learn how to plan and to know all the different things that they have to do to start a social organization that is even sustainable, where we don't always have to beg for donorship. And if you need any help in anything that I know, I'd be very happy to help. And I know of the best parenting program, which was Common Sense Parenting, developed by Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska. And I'm a trainer in that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, we will handle testimony at the next meeting. We're not going to do, that was, we only put that in the memo if we had time, but we don't. So
Great.
that's that. Next time.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our tremendous staff. Thank you very much for everybody who came in and testified today. It was a very good day. We are adjourned.